Welcome to our final session. Thank you for being the last people standing in Theatre 2. We really appreciate. It's such a shame because I've got some fantastic guest speakers for this last session. The last little bit of housekeeping. I'm Andra Kennedy, Culture 24. We're recording this, so it will be online. So everyone who's missing it will get to see it online instead. And if you've got any feedback for the M&H show organisers, it's info@museumsandheritage.com. They'd love to hear from you. Okay, let's get going. So I'm going to hand over very shortly to my fantastic guest, Sian, from MoDA, Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture, and from Jeens, who is the director at Jewish Museum London. But I wanted to just set the scene a little bit, because we're here to talk about balancing the benefits of hybrid working. And I'm just starting off with this definition of digital transformation. Digital transformation is a very jargony term that gets thrown around a lot. And I think this definition is very useful. The process and the result of using digital technology to transform how an organisation operates and delivers value. It helps an organisation to thrive, fulfil its mission, and meet the needs of its stakeholders. That is what's happening to all of us now. We are in a process of digital transformation, whether we kind of quite realised it or not. And the sharp end of that, from our work that we see at the moment with museums and galleries in the UK and around the world, the sharp end of that is this sometimes thorny challenge of hybrid working and how we're all working. So Culture 24 ran a survey. We had almost 100 cultural sector, mainly museum folk, reply to that a few months ago. And I'm just going to throw up, to set the scene, some quotes from that survey. It was about the impact of hybrid working. And I'm not going to read all of these quotes out to you, but I wanted to just bring those voices, anonymized voices, of course, of people who work in the sector into the room. Not everything can be done on Zoom in our sector. This person got to spend more time researching and working on projects rather than working on front of house. I'll give you a minute to look at this one. So these are in answer to a question about, we asked people to give an example of how remote working has changed the way that you do your job. There's a lot of angst in that response. Terrible IT support, distractions, no opportunity to raise minor IT irritations. That's not a very happy person. This one, in answer to the same question, is much more positive. They've saved loads of times. They're collaborating. They felt that it's more collaborative, less hierarchical, more multidisciplinary. That person is obviously feeling trusted, but there is that little thing at the end there, so they can work when and how they want, and as a result, probably working even more than they were before the pandemic. Then the niggles coming out, because one of the things with this survey, it's a really mixed picture. It's a complicated picture and it's a challenging picture. So this issue around that term hierarchy, this person was a really typical response. Operational, you have to be on site, senior managers sitting at home. And then workspaces and the issue around early career. People in particular came through in this as one of the concerns in the sector. So, where are you working? We haven't all got fancy offices. I know I was in my kitchen for the whole of lockdown, and that's challenging. And another positive one, increased participation from across the globe, more people. Reaching more people, looking forward to developing that. Phenomenal improvement in work-life balance. Well-being, cooking, exercising, another really positive take. on the impact. Again, that point around what would have been their commute. So key things to sort of frame the talks you're going to hear. The key things that came out of this were concerns around inclusion, accessibility, equity. There were concerns about the practicalities, about budgets, management challenges, strategic challenges, but there was a balance with lots of positivity as well, as we've seen. So I'm going to stop talking now. That was setting the stage for these guys. I'm going to hand over to hear from people who are on the front line of this, managing this process. So Sian.
Have the clicker. Thank you. Let's switch between the presentations. Thanks. Thank you. That one. No, not that one. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So what do you think about when you think about hybrid working? This session asks about the benefits of hybrid working, but maybe for you, it's all too freshly associated with pandemic, homeschooling, isolation, furlough, or lockdown. Maybe you have a cynical view, or maybe you haven't really had much chance to think about it and everything's still drifting along in a bit of a haze of uncertainty. Are we going back to normal, or at least to how things were before? Can we? Should we? Are we even talking about the same thing when we talk about hybrid working? I don't know about you, but all sorts of terms seem to get used and conflated interchangeably. Even when we think we agree on the term hybrid working, it turns out there are multiple forms of that. No doubt we like a good label in this sector, but however we label it, it seems that we are all navigating new ways of working. So I can tell you MoDA's experience, how we got to where we are now with hybrid working, top tips we learned along the way, and the benefits and pitfalls we've found so far. So when the Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture's museum building closed in April 2011, MoDA moved to a smaller building and relaunched with a new tagline, online, on tour, and on request. Losing our physical exhibition and public spaces forced MoDA to rethink what it meant to be a museum. Little did we know, it was also preparing us for working through a pandemic. When I joined MoDA in 2016, it was already a hybrid working environment. There was no designated office space, and all staff were given a laptop, not a desktop PC. Physical space constraints meant that even though we were a small team with 7 staff at that time, if everybody came into the museum at the same time, there wasn't enough space to work. When students came to visit the collections, and we could only fit about 12 at a time, any members of staff not teaching had to work elsewhere, a hot desk on the main campus, or at the British Library, or working from home. So today this might be considered a mix of fixed hybrid working and distributed working. Full-time staff expected at the museum, part-time staff had set working from home days, but sometimes staff needed to just work away from the museum building. So this is where tip number 1 comes in, find the right tools to enable the work. Adopting digital tools was a way of overcoming the challenges of being a small team with limited space. There were still plenty of legacy collection records on paper and card in the museum building, but we made it possible to access many of our work processes and documents wherever we happened to be working, and nor were they machine dependent, so you didn't necessarily have to be on a particular laptop or computer to access everything. MoDA mapped the digital tools we were using in 2017, and by 2018 we'd moved our collections management database to a server which we could remotely access. And our website was a WordPress site we could access just through the browser and update it ourselves. Now, our IT is determined by the university that we're part of, which can be a double-edged sword. So as some of the tools were decided for us, the best thing that we could do was work out how those tools could be best for our context. So this is where tip number 2 comes in, be experimental and adaptable. Our changing situation and the need to use the tools that were available or affordable from 2011 onwards meant that we had to adapt to changing ways of working. Whenever we adopted new systems and tools, it's been important to take the time to find out where the pain points are and work out ways around them or choose different tools if necessary or possible. So our map of digital tools has changed since 2017, as has our approach to hybrid working. This is because lockdown made us think about the setup we had and the setup we needed, and we started to talk amongst the team about their experiences. So this is tip number 3, involve, don't impose. MoDA's done a lot of trying out these new ways of working as a team, which prepared us well for figuring out how to work through the pandemic. This whole period has been unsettling in lots of different ways, so it's been important to talk as a team about the changing landscape of work, what's possible, what's needed by each member of staff and the organisation, and how we can accommodate all that. Clear communication about expectations and the reasons behind working patterns and changing needs are key to ensuring that there's trust and understanding on all sides. The ability to keep feeding back about how everything's working is also important. So connected to this is the need to make decisions based on data, not assumptions, be data-driven. There's been much suspicion in the past around home working, but productivity is not proved by presence. Equally, it's easy to put something in place and just assume it works. So instead of assuming what will and won't work for you and your team, ask questions, experiment, survey people about how it's going, and be prepared to find that some things work and some don't, and make changes based on the feedback and information you collect. You might want to try to find out first about everyone's experience of working during lockdown. It'd be good to review the things that worked and didn't and why that might have been. You might want to have an open discussion or conduct anonymous surveys. And tip number 5, make work accessible. Communication and connectivity are key. When we talked as a team about the work setup during lockdown, we discovered that pre-pandemic, those who had days working from home would miss out on anything communicated in a casual way by those working in the office. When everyone was working and communicating remotely, everything was happening in the same space. So this is something we've had to consider for our new approaches to hybrid. Some of this we'd done already, making workflows more transparent, moving as many as we could into the open. And this is our acquisitions procedure on Trello. So although tasks might fall to one member of staff, if that member of staff's off for any length of time, any other member of the team can find out where they've got to in the process and continue that work. MoDA now operates what might be considered a remote-first hybrid model, which is to say that staff default to working from home. The benefit of this is the ability to be much more focused in our tasks. When we're in the museum, we focus on tasks specific to that space, such as the salvage training shown here, or working on the store. So this flexibility improves work-life integration, well-being and health, and reduces our time commuting. It takes me about 1.5 hours to get to the museum on a good day when tubes and trains are running well. So now I can organise my tasks so that if I'm going to the museum, I concentrate on the physical space and the tasks there. Another benefit is the possibilities of wider collaboration and thinking beyond borders. Earlier this year, we ran a 3-month student project around our Instagram account entirely online. This meant we could involve not just Middlesex University students, but also students from other universities, including a student from Warwick who was actually doing a placement in Venice at the time. The tools we use and our new ways of working have allowed us to think beyond the usual boundaries and constraints. When we recorded our 2nd and 3rd podcasts seasons during lockdown, the guests included researchers and academics from Australia and America. Now, technically, we could have done this before, but it kind of hadn't really occurred to us, so it's broadened our ways of thinking. Some of the benefits, though, do have associated pitfalls. Flexibility of working hours and place can lead to blurred boundaries and the challenges of a hybrid schedule. It's easy to miss the end of your workday when you don't have to go anywhere to go home. Hybrid schedules mean anyone could be working anywhere on any given day, which can make scheduling meetings and training tricky. And there's always a day when your laptop refuses to work or your broadband fails. So dealing with the last issue first, unfortunately, technology might fail you wherever you're working. All you can do is have backup tasks, and this applies equally to working in the museum building as working from home or elsewhere. The issue of blurred boundaries requires us to develop new boundaries, rhythms, and rituals. This might be something you talk about as a team, or you might offer suggestions and let individuals implement their own solutions. Ask questions like, how will you mark the start and end of your workday? How should we conduct online meetings? This is something we became aware of doing our online student project. Because it was online, as soon as everyone was in the meeting space, we started the formal session. Had we met in person, there would have been informal pre-session chat. So this is something we need to be much more intentional about in the future. Maybe we took things for granted before, like where people would be working from day to day. Given that people will be at the museum on different days and sometimes in other locations altogether, and actually that was true before the pandemic, making sure everyone's calendars are up to date and accessible is important, and having a central calendar can be useful as well. Equally, maybe we made assumptions about meetings and their purposes that we should now rethink for our new ways of working. How might catching up with your team work? A regular meeting, in person or online? So this is something we do online at MoDA. During lockdowns, we began to do it every day at the same time, and then decided it would be better to do it Tuesday to Thursday, just before lunch, and make it an informal chat. So if you're working on site, you don't have to join in. But to make sure we still know what everyone's doing, we set up a bot, an automated program on Slack, which is one of the programs we use. And that asks everyone a few questions at the same time each day and posts it to a channel for everyone to see. And you can complete it at any point during the day, but it helps people see where you're working, what you've been working on, and asks if you have any issues. So another member of staff might be able to help you if you're stuck on something. We've decided not to do hybrid meetings. Everyone is either online or in person. That way, they have the same setup and status in the meeting. We're still working on how to make fun and informal spaces in our work days. We have a Slack channel for random chat, and we might post something amusing or interesting there that isn't work-related. And the informal online meetings before lunch give us a chance to catch up generally, not just about work. During lockdown, we had a few afternoon tea and cake gatherings online, and since things opened up, we came together in person for some training and went out for lunch together in the middle. I'd say this is the area that is the least certain and will probably take some time and trial and error to develop. So context is key to all this. There are different ways of doing things, and they'll all work for different contexts and different purposes. Every museum will be different, so you can't choose an off-the-shelf solution. We need to approach everything with much more intention together as we work out what hybrid working might look like in each of our different contexts. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Just going to bring up the slides, and I'm going to start my clock to begin with. So that was great, Sian. She's gone through loads of detail, which I'm not going to repeat. What I'm going to look at is something a little bit different, which is how the Jewish Museum London has approached sort of I hate to say post-pandemic, it feels like I'm immediately jinxing us all, but in a move away from pandemic working environment. So I'm Fran, I'm the director of the Jewish Museum London. I've been at the museum for about 10 years or so. Does that work? Yes? Marvellous. Okay. And I stepped up as director just as COVID-19 arrived in Britain. So just a little bit of context on the museum. We're a smallish team, about 15 members of staff. We were smaller during the pandemic for furlough kinds of reasons. We have a very, very collaborative approach to our work. So as an example, all staff are on the duty management rota and cover each other's shifts, and especially lunch times and breaks and things like that. Which obviously means that we need a lot of people on site every day, so hybrid working has thrown up a few things that we need to think about. During the lockdown itself, only 3 members of staff were allowed in the museum. That was myself, the operations manager, and the collections manager. So most staff hadn't been in the building for about a year and a half. So really for them, it was about reintroducing how we felt about coming back into the office. We'd also run a huge online program, which was very successful, and thinking about how we were going to continue that whilst also coming back to the museum was a huge conversation for us. When we knew we were going to reopen the museum, we had to have an honest conversation with each other about the fact that the default was going to change. The default during lockdown would be work from home. The default coming back in was going to have to be default work from the museum with some work from home. So just giving each other that sort of psychological moment to talk that through and how that's going to feel to everybody. So what does working from home or hybrid working look like for Jewish Museum London? I've picked the 4 ways that we really approach this, and I'm just going to talk through a little bit for each one. So one is work from home Fridays, which is a new endeavor for us. The next one is contracted and set sort of work from home days. Those are baked into your contracts. Ad hoc work from home days and remote only roles. So work from home Fridays is my new favorite thing we've implemented. We used to be open 7 days a week, but we knew that coming back into reopening the museum, that was probably not necessary because visitor numbers didn't really warrant 7 days a week opening. And secondly, just thinking about, was the working culture what we liked before? Do we want to just carry that on into a new way of working? And the answer from everybody was no, not really. Trying to staff a small museum 7 days a week is probably unnecessary in lots of different ways. So instead, we decided to open only 5 days a week. So we changed our open hours. And that meant we could start to think a little bit differently about staffing the museum as well. So one of the things we were very aware of as we started to move back into hybrid working was it had all worked virtually because we were all virtual. As soon as we started coming back into the museum, and some people were there, some people from home, some of our audience was here and some of the audience was home, it all starts to get much trickier communication-wise. So all the things that Sian said I would absolutely agree with. But work from home Fridays have enabled a couple of things. One is the equality of the access to work from home. When we're open, we need duty manager staff. There's no way around it. When we're open to schools, we need learning staff. And therefore, just like Sian was saying, some roles, and I think Andra said at the beginning, some roles are simply able to work from home more than other roles are. And it's not equal. And we really had to reflect on what is equality across different roles. I could sign off myself to work from home 4 days a week, and it would probably be possible. Is that fair? Is that the right thing to do? Is that the right approach we want to take to a work culture if I then have to ask the duty manager to be the person who has to be in 5 days a week? So we had to stop and think about that. The only way I could make sure everyone had a work from home day was to have a set work from home day, and that meant changing the museum opening hours. So work from home Fridays, everybody works from home. The only exceptions to that are it's now a great day to do maintenance in the building. So sometimes we have contractors in because it's very hard to bother anyone when there's no one there. And on the very, very rare occasion, we would allow an extra large school group who we don't want around, in public opening hours. But those are very, very rare. So the second version is contracted set work from home days. So previous to COVID, we didn't have any of these. Everybody was on site all the time. It didn't matter if you worked 3 days a week or 5 days a week. Everybody was just at the museum. And we weren't set up in any sort of way to work from home anyway before the COVID pandemic. But as we started to come back, people said, quite openly, they have care responsibilities and asked if the museum would consider some sort of model which would allow them to have a set additional work from home day. So we, again, had to reflect on this because it's possible for some roles and not possible for others. So I could say yes to one person, but have to say no to another person. And again, thinking about what does that look like? What does equity look like across our team? We decided in the end, we sort of did a bit of consultation with staff, and we decided we would say yes, but that we would have to know that some roles would have access to that more than others. But that was offset by the fact everybody had work from home Fridays. If we hadn't had that, the response may have been different. So we have allowed everybody to request an additional work from home day. So they get the Fridays and then they can request any other day of the week. The only exception to that is we have designated Thursday as on-site day because there are just times when you just need everybody physically together in the building doing something, and it means we know everybody's working and everybody can be at the museum. Then we have ad hoc work from home days. So any staff member can request an ad hoc day. So if you checked your diary the week ahead and it turns out you're doing an application bid and you'd rather be working at home on that day, you can just email your line manager and say, look, is it fine if I do that day from home? And they'll go back and say, yep, that's absolutely fine. The only responsibility they have is to just double check they're not on the lunchtime rota, that they're not, standing in for somebody or on backup for a tour, something like that. Otherwise, they can have that time as and when they need it, and we just trust that they know their own working environment. Most staff use this probably a few times a month. So it turns out most people are working from home probably 2 days a week on average. And then we tried something a bit new. We tried our very first remote-only role. So we hired our finance director, who's an interim finance director. He was based in Wales, so very remote to London, where we are. And we really trialed out what it meant to have somebody who was, all the time not at the museum. And the truth is that 90% of their work absolutely could be done. It was finance. It was all online anyway. Everybody was emailing invoices. Absolutely could be done. But not everything. Some stuff still comes by paper, some stuff still needs to be filed. And the truth of it was that while 90% of it was fine, 10% of it was being covered by other members of staff, and their workload started to increase because they're the ones doing the extra bit of filing, finding that, chasing that person on the phone. So whilst it is possible to have a remote-only role, I think what we have learned is that we have to reflect and build in that time to other support members of staff to say, if someone is full-time work from home, somebody else is going to have to do the stuff on site, and we need to make sure that's reflected in the time that we give them. As this post is retired, just as a space for honesty, when we decided to recruit the permanent post, we've enabled it to be a hybrid, so work from home and from the museum, but not only work from home, because we thought the workload on other members of staff was too high. So we've made that decision. So just a couple of reflections just to end on, really, that some roles definitely enable hybrid working, while others are much trickier to do. And I think we really have to just stop and reflect on what equal access to this hybrid way of working really means for us as organizations and the work culture that we want to provide. We've also, we've given our staff much more autonomy, I think, than we ever have before in deciding what their own work environment works for them. And I think trusting them to make those decisions has only worked in the museum's benefit. We have done extraordinary things over the last 2 years, and we continue to do extraordinary things. There's no need for data evidence, from our point of view or from our board of trustees to know how many hours they did and when they did those hours. It doesn't mean anything. The projects are done and they are extremely good. And I think the other thing that we have learned is that it is actually really important to us to have that set day when everyone is actually at the museum. Again, that may be different for different organizations, but for us, that very collaborative nature that we like to work in just makes being in person the way that we like to work. I'll stop there, but obviously we'll have some time for questions if anybody has any.
Thank you so much, Fran and Sian. I really appreciate your openness and honesty, both of you. Any questions? I'll come to you with the mic. Practical questions or more strategic questions around the future of the museum? Marta, let me come to you. Hold the microphone very close to your mouth.
Okay, so do you think museum professionals are really thinking about that remote jobs are here to stay? It's not only a question of during the pandemic, but can be a possibility of working on remote. Do you think it's possible that this could remain in the future? Okay. I was asking if you think that remote jobs are here to stay, and if you think this is not only because of the pandemic, but this is a real possibility for the future, that you can hire people that can be working in Wales, in France, in Spain, in the USA, because you are always focused on talent, not in where are people living, but what do you need? I need a person with these skills and this training, and this person is in the States, doesn't matter. I want to hire. Do you think it's going to stay, this change of mentality is going to remain here?
I think, personally, if we take the example of like our finance officer who was remote, they weren't international remote, well, depends how you consider Wales, but they were nationally elsewhere. I think the thing with the pandemic in a lot of ways was we went from one extreme to the other. So we went from everything had to be in person to everything had to be at home. And I think we were all caught up in this idea. Look at how many people moved out of London and moved to, a 2-hour commute away, because this is it. This is the new way of working. I don't have to commute in. And then, of course, we reopened, and so people started having to commute in like 2 hours, one way. So I think it had a bit of a tendency to immediately go the other direction, which is probably not real, for us. I think the mentality of making sure you're finding the right person and not just the person who lives, closest to you. Absolutely. I would hope most museums are thinking about that anyway. But I think for us, the reality is it's great to work in partnership with some people who are remote and international, like some of the examples you were giving. But when it comes to team culture and the ability to pitch in, especially in small teams, having somebody who's never there, I think doesn't work for us, like in the way that we work. It could work somewhere else. But I think when I think about our organization, hybrid working is here to stay, for sure. But I don't think I would ever hire another role that was completely always remote.
What about you, Sian?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting area of discussion, and it's something that the tech world in particular has been thinking about quite a lot. And part of the issue, I think, is to do with we've got used to particular ways of working, and we haven't really thought about those ways before, but we've been made to think about how we work now. So I think you're right in that in a lot of situations it will be quite difficult to introduce a remote-only role because teams are still quite used to working in a particular way. But that doesn't mean it won't ever happen more, and it might be that we need to think more about how we would make that work if it is a case of that person is absolutely the right talent for the job, and the only reason we can't hire them is because they're not in the right place. But again, it's context driven, I would say. So if you need them to be on site, it may be that you say they have to visit the site a certain number of times a year, but they can work wherever the rest of the time. And that will be really dependent on the organisation, what they're willing to do and what the worker is willing to do as well. So I think there's still quite a lot of work to do on this. None of this is set in stone, and we're still trying it out, which is kind of where I might plug the Culture 24 project that's about to start on hybrid working.
That's a lovely cue, thank you. Yeah, we run a Let's Get Real collaborative action research project every year, and this year we're looking at hybrid working. So we're gathering a group of museums and other cultural organisations together to experiment with hybrid working, and you can go onto the Culture 24 website and find out about it. Thank you, Sian, cueing me in on that. Any more questions? Well, I've got a quick one, but I want to make sure there aren't. No, just, I loved that online on tour side at MoDA. Do you think this, maybe going back to Marta's question, and then do you think that we are going to see more museums that don't have a physical venue because of this, enabled by this?
I would hope that there'd be that move towards that a bit more. I think that the thing is there are a lot of museums who still have physical spaces, so it's quite difficult to not be a physical museum if you have that space. And there's still that, it's something that MoDA talks about quite a lot. A lot of museum things are driven by having exhibition space and public spaces. And when we lost ours, it made us think in very different ways. And it's something that I found as well. I worked at the Postal Museum while they didn't have a museum space, and it actually forced us to think in different ways and do different kinds of projects. So I think there's definitely a possibility for making us think in different ways, but we're still really tied to the physical, I think. Obviously, the objects are really important, and the physical objects, the materiality of objects are really important. And it's something that we say at MoDA, we're not a virtual museum, we're a digital museum. So we still encourage people to come and see the actual objects, but we want to use digital tools to widen that access and enable those projects and those collaborations. And when I was a curator at a local authority museum, my time was quite often taken up at just mounting exhibitions endlessly and all the work that went into that. And I didn't have time to develop new ideas around the collections because I was tied to the physical building. So I'd hope that there might be a chance to kind of get us away a bit from that.
Thank you. Any thoughts on that one, Fran, before we...
No, I think it's interesting. I know a museum that we're connected to who over the pandemic, they rented their building and the rent went up and they decided to just stop because they thought they didn't know when they were going to reopen. And they did turn into a virtual museum. I won't name them, but the reality check was that they still had a collection and they still needed somewhere to hold it. So what ended up happening is we ended up with it. And that's a temporary, maybe permanent thing. So I think, I don't know, I think a virtual museum, maybe it depends on like if it exists as a new thing or if it exists with a collection or a space, like Sian was saying beforehand. I mean, I'm biased, I suppose. I came up through education and learning. I can't help but prefer in-person, physical handling of objects, seeing people, having these discussions in person. I think about like this conference, it was online, but what we've all gained from this as well. I think the hybrid nature, I think, is a perfect balance. I think for me, the too extreme either direction is I can't imagine it, but can imagine many things 2 years ago, so who knows? Yeah.
That's the perfect close. Unless no more hands going up. No, just then thank you both so much for your time and your insights in this session. It's really great to have you. And that's Theatre 2 done for today. Again, thank you for being the last people standing for the last session, and hopefully see you next year. Thank you.